All right, Pete and Mary, your whining day trippers here. Today we are at Stoutridge Winery and Distillery in the beautiful Hudson Valley, New York. So let's go check it out. Okay, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We actually did a wine tasting that was presented by the owner and winemaker, Stephen Osborn. He gave an extremely interesting presentation. I encourage everyone to stay with it. I understand that this is a little bit longer video than normal, but I think it'd be well worth your time to listen to everything he has to say. I learned a ton of stuff from him. Before we get into the presentation, I'm just going to give you a little tour of the inside of the winery. The winery itself, the grounds are beautiful. It's a beautiful property. It's a nice size winery. The tasting room is nice and big. It can accommodate a lot of people. They also have a self-guided tour that you can go into their barrel room. You can take a look at their barrels. Everything that's in this room, all the barrels are full. He explains about the barrels themselves, about their barrel room, and what they do differently with theirs as opposed to a lot of other people. But this is a look at the inside of the barrel room. As you can see, they're all full, so they are working barrels. Then from here, they also have a distillery, so we'll go take a look at their distillery room. We did not try any of the spirits, but it was a nice size distillery room. That's right after we leave here. There it is. And from here, it flows right into the gift shop. Like I said, it's a nice size winery. There's the gift shop, and as you can see, there's a bridal party here that we were waiting for them to get finished. Just keep in mind that at the beginning of the presentation, they're still there, so it's very loud, but that ends very quickly. So from here, we'll give it over to Stephen Osborn. Let him give the presentation, and I really do hope you enjoy it, and I hope you stick with it.
All right, we're very close here. So I'm just going to start. I'll go slowly into So welcome, folks. I'm Steve. I'm the owner and the winemaker and the distiller. My wife Kim is owner, winemaker, and distiller. She and I built this place. We've been here for 15 years as a winery, 3 years as a distillery. Our distillery has employees, but the winery is just her and I. There's nobody else. We have 1 guy and 7 acres of vineyards. The 3 of us make and sell $30,000 a year. That sounds ambitious, but the way it works is a lot of people come. We only sell wine here, and the reason a lot of people come is you're the only winery in the United States that uses no chemicals in winemaking. We make completely natural wines. And the reason we're so different is because my wife and I are not from the wine industry, we're not from the distilling industry, we're biochemists, we're just in natural flavor chemistry. And natural flavor chemistry is really easy to distort. And the wine industry does things in normal winemaking to distort it. So we don't do normal winemaking, we do this completely natural winemaking. The reason the wine industry is using chemicals in winemaking is there's 2 big problems. The first, they don't refrigerate the trucks. On a day like this, the distribution truck is getting over 150 degrees. There's nothing natural in a 150 degree truck. So part of what you learn in winemaking school is how to make wine stable for a hot truck. The other problem we have is that in the old days, wine took a long time. It's true. We take minimum 6 years to make whites, minimum 8 years to make rosés and reds, and often longer. So if you're wondering how could these guys be the only guys in the United States doing this, it's 6 to 8 years to make wines you can't ship. And then they're going to be different enough that someone's going to have to explain them. And it's me, the winemaker, that explains. I do every tasting here. We only sell wine here. She does the checkouts, she does the books, I make the wine, the guy grows the grapes, and that's just how it is. And that's how it has to be to have this kind of winery. So what I'm going to show you today is what wine would be like with no chemicals in the production. Also, interestingly, you're in the oldest wine growing town in the United States. This town has had wine grapes since 1730. The farm you're on documented since 1790, and wine in this town wasn't processed until the 1940s. So I'm not only showing you how wine would be without processing, how wine used to be, but I'm going to show you examples of wines of how they used to be right here 80 years ago when no one was processing wine. And now we're the only ones doing it, right? Because a lot has changed. It's largely because the bank gives you about 9 months to make wine. You need 9 years. And the shipping industry gives you 160 degrees and you need 110. So they're just not meeting. Everything makes sense so far? Is that?
The people in Bangor are biochemists too.
Okay,
Yeah.
so.
Remember
Yeah.
she said, yeah.
So 1730 to 1960, the white grapes of this area were only American grapes. They didn't grow French grapes. So we think of like Concord, Catawba, we think of white American grape as very, very sweet wine. But here's your first rule. Sweet wine is never natural. Sweet wine is always processed wine. If a wine is sweet, it is by definition a processed wine. So what I'm going to show you in the first wine is the flavor of Niagara grapes that we always think of as sweet, but without the processing that makes it sour, sweet, and fruity, right? And the reason we always think of it as sweet is because who is going to take 80 years to make a wine they can't ship just to show you what wine used to be like? Well, that's what we do. Right? So here is Ridge White. This wine took 7.5 years to make. It's 9 years old now. It has a 40-year shelf life, which is longer than the red wine you buy. So if you're wondering how long is the shelf life, longer than the red you buy. And I made a lot of the red you buy in California. I have a degree in winemaking as well as biochemistry, and in winemaking I made a lot of the stuff for the store. Lucky to have a 20-year shelf life in reds. Here my whites have 30 to 40 years, this one 40 years. So the flavor of local grapes that we think of normally in this heavy sweet context, here it is without the sugar, and here it is at 9 years old tasting sort of fresh, vibrant. Okay, so Ridge White. That's the longest you'll ever have to wait for the first taste in a wine tasting in the United States. But there's a lot to say, right? There's no nothing. We're the only wine in the United States using no chemicals. Winemakers can use about 40. You know about the sulfites. You don't know
How
about
it
all the
tastes in
others.
one
We
place
use
in
no.
New Hope a little bit.
We also use no pumps and no filters. No pumps, no filters, no chemicals. So there you go, guys. That's how wine used to be. It was made of American grapes. They didn't grow French grapes, and it was never sweet. But it was older. You can see there a 9-year-old wine tasting fresh, tasting like grapes. So far, so good?
Love it.
Yeah, so when you think back in the past, and you think, oh, the old timers, how did they put up with all that sweet wine? They didn't know how to make sweet wine. Sweet wine is the technological advancement. No sugar in wine is the natural. So by the 1950s, the wine you just drank has become intolerably sweet. And the wine industry does what every other food industry does when things don't taste good processed. We look for an ingredient that tastes better processed. So the tomato in the store is not the tomato at the roadside stand, right? The tomato in the store is built for durability, and the roadside stand is for flavor. The same thing happens in wine. The wine store is 1/2000th the genome. For every Chardonnay, there's 2,000 grapes missing. It's just like the tomatoes in the store. And what's left is the piece that tastes best processed. And unfortunately for Americans, the piece of the genome that tastes best processed is the European species. The European species evolved to warm climate adaptation tastes better processed, and the only reason we drink European wine, the only reason, is it tastes better processed, right? Because in this town, it wasn't until they were processing that they started growing European grapes. In the case of white wine, it wasn't until the 1960s. So in the 1960s, we started growing Vial Blanc and Seyval Blanc, and we did it to make less sweet wine because the first one turned too sweet. Now, the white wine around here is still lightly sweet and fruity, and sweetness and fruitiness are the symptoms of processing. So here's what it's like before the chemistry that made it sour, sweet, and fruity, but it took 7 years to make. Right? So here's Seyval Blanc, Vidal Blanc, that changed in the genome to accommodate processing, and I'm just showing you what it would have tasted like in southern France in the 1800s when it was made naturally. It's really kind of a cool thing, though, because the grapes that they decided to grow here, the French grapes, actually make a wine that's kind of an appley taste. And it's the major crop of our town nowadays, our apples. So I guess if you're going to change the genome from grapes to French, you might as well choose a genome that tastes like apples and say, the region is the flavor of apples. Right? So that's kind of a cool side note. And there's a whole interesting story behind that.
This guy's name says you're making wine wrong.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. All right, so Chris fresh apple. Oh my God, tastes like it was just made. It's 7 years old. No sour, no need for sugar. That's great, because without the sugar, there's no need to sulfite sterilize, because you have to sterilize sweet wine. You have to chemically sterilize it. Now, another thing you might notice when you're tasting these wines is there's like a little bit of bubble to it. It's very delicate, little tiny bit of bubble. And the reason is because all wine by nature has little bubbles. See those little bubbles? Because fermentation produces gases. And what gets rid of those gases are pumps and filters. When you hear about a winemaker not wanting to filter, the reason is not because the filter removes any particular flavor, it's because the filter removes dissolved gases. And when you remove dissolved gases, everything gets flat, right? There's an area in your faucet for a reason. It's because you get a little bit of bubble in your water, it'll taste better. So here's the thing you do. Next time you're ordering a fancy wine, or you're at a dinner and somebody orders a fancy wine, and the sommelier comes over and puts it in a decanter, take a look. No bubbles at all come up. You should point and say, hey, look, it's a filtered wine. And you'd be right. And that's why winemakers don't filter. So you'll notice the bubbles in that. So any wine by nature has a little bit of bubble to it. So it's part of why it tastes fresh. You love the taste of bubbles. I mean, the evidence of that is everywhere. And there's a good evolutionary reason for that. We can go in there another time. But the reason you like bubbles is your ancestors that like bubbles lived, and the ones that didn't died. So you like bubbles. Bubbles tend to destroy bacteria. So in the past, that was good. Cool, right? So still a good tasting wine. I'm just pointing out how we altered the genome to get that flavor set. So rosés used to look like that. In fact, before about 1860 in Europe, almost all wine looked like that. There wasn't red, there wasn't white. There was sort of light red or dark rosé. And that's kind of weird. Why were they only making that? Well, here's the thing. In wine, color is flavor. So this wine has enough color to be nice and flavorful, but it's not so colorful that it isn't kind of light. It's kind of like the best of both worlds. It's the lightness of red, but the lightness of white, but it's the flavor of red. Now here's the problem. We already know that this wine process has become sour and sweet, but the problem is that this wine is red enough to become dry like a red wine, and dry is a processing artifact. So as you process this wine, it's going to become dry because it's kind of red, and it's going to become sour and sweet because it's kind of white. And I'm going to save you $30,000 right now. I'm going to save you 2 semesters at UC Davis. You can't solve for both at the same time. You solve for bitter in processed wine by burying it in flavor. You make a red wine because in wine color is flavor. And you solve for sour in wine by eliminating bitter, which is the color, make really light rosés and whites, and then solve for sour. When you walk into a wine store and the wine is white and red, there's your evidence you're in a processing world. It's made red to solve for bitter, it's made white to solve for sour. That's what you're going to learn at UC Davis. So save your 30 grand. But the reason that it was so prevalent is because, again, it's the best of both worlds. If you don't have to worry about sour or bitter, you can have flavor and lightness at the same time. And you'll see why that's so awesome. So this is Cabernet Franc Rosé. This took 9 years to make. It's 11 years old. Cabernet Franc is a grape that tastes a little like a garden. So bell peppers, green tomatoes. The fermentation is kind of spicy. So it's a wine that tastes like gazpacho. It's really cool. It's like 11 years old. Paris, 1900 to 1930. This is the wine. They stopped making it in the 1930s because it takes 8 years to make. And they were enthralled with it for the 30 years from 1900 because it tastes like food, and the Parisians are big on food. So check this out. We're recreating the wine of Paris cafes in the early 1900s from a grape that's sort of indigenous to northern France. There you go. Cabernet Franc Rosé. Fresh, vibrant, tastes like a garden.
It does taste very
And remember, this is how wine in general used to be. It wasn't white, it wasn't red. I can go more into that at a different time, but suffice it to say that that's how it was. And there you can see why. Lightness, freshness, flavor, oh my God, and it tastes like food. That's the other beautiful thing about this type of rosé, they almost always taste food-like. So people see the gazpacho, the salsa, that sort of fresh taste. Yeah, if you don't like peppers, and you're in a lot of hurt for this wine, but if you do like peppers, you're in good shape. And the spiciness. And 11 years old, but it tastes like I just made it in the kitchen or something, right? It's really, really fresh. Shelf life on that is 70 to 80 years, so you got time, give it to the grandkids. They can have it when they retire. That's cool. So far, so good? All right. So the next wine is a red wine. It's called Heritage Red. So in red wines, we're not getting that heavy, dry taste. And my wines, you saw the barrel room on the tour, but the barrels that I have don't impart oak flavor. Because oak flavor is not from barrels, it's from charred barrels, and those barrels weren't charred, right? The nice thing about the barrels I have is they last 300 or 400 years. You can regrow the forest in the time it takes to use them up. The other cool thing about it is when you look in that barrel room and you see the barrels sitting in that big cement room, the barrels have twice as long a life as the cement they're in. So the cement goes away first, right? That's kind of a cool thing to think about, especially if you're a geek like me. Maybe it's just me. But anyway, Heritage Red is the red of this town. Around 1900, a bunch of Sicilians moved to this town. They started making Sicilian-style red wine. They made two basic styles of red wine. This is their summertime red. The summertime red is designed to be light and refreshing. We look at the color of that and think, well, how can that be light and refreshing? But I don't know, how can a dark purple plum in a cool dish be light and refreshing? It's because without processing, it's not heavy. We're biased towards thinking of this wine as a heavy, dry wine, but it cannot be because it's unprocessed. And if you're careful about the grapes you can grow, you can make red wines the way we think of whites, as refreshing. Very flavorful, but refreshing. This wine took 11 years to make. It's 9 years old. It's Sicilian style. We are the last producer of this type of wine. Like I said, this town sort of originated this wine 130 years ago. And it's going away because the grape growers no longer grow the grapes. They don't taste good processed. We're growing Cabernet Franc to make better tasting processed wine. And this Sicilian style will go away. So this is Heritage Red, 11-year-old. The summertime, chill it in the creek, open it on the hot evening, and you have a nice refreshing wine in the way that Marlborough used to drink back in the day. It's mostly Deshaun.
Tastes like Grandpa Moozie's wine. Maybe because he came over from Italy.
There you go. Easy drinking, no heavy dry. You get like a nice smokiness, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's how red wine used to be. So yeah, around 1900 they started producing that, and probably we'll stop making wine in about 10 years, so 1900 to 2025, and then that will be the end. Because probably the grapes will be gone by then. And we'll be moving on to Cabernet Franc. You see this move towards Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is how you maximize your profit in a world where the trucks are hot and time is short. It's just a grape that tastes fantastic processed. I'm just showing you how it was when it wasn't red, right? When it used to be made rosé. But there's not the option nowadays to make it that way. If you want the flavor, you got to bury the bitterness of the flavor, and you make red wine. I should charge for that. I paid a lot of money for that stuff. It's crazy when you think about it. You'd think that winemakers would talk about this stuff, but they can't talk about it because then they'd be fired, right? So I was really inspired by doing that, and that was a wine of the town, and I just recreated. When I recreated that, that's really cool, so maybe I can do that again. And I did do that again with a grape called Noiret. And Noiret is an interesting grape. It's a grape that has a big, spicy, peppery flavor, but it makes wine with very low alcohol. Right? And here's a thing to ponder. In nature, the white wines are slightly more full-bodied than the reds. The reason we think of red as more full-bodied than whites is because processed, reds taste better with high alcohol. It's part of how you bury bitterness, high alcohol. Now you know everything. And in white wines, they taste much better processed if you make them with low alcohol. So we're skewed towards this red wines are full-bodied, white wines are light-bodied, but in nature, the white wines are actually slightly more full-bodied than the whites, or than the reds. So it shouldn't surprise us to see a red wine that has very light body, but in this case, it may be surprising to see that it has this big balsamic pepper. And by pepper, I don't mean like some vague notion of pepper. I mean, when you taste this, you're going to think maybe I used pepper in the winemaking. But we are the only winery in the United States that uses no chemicals in winemaking. I would just say that as it's more naturally made, you identify it with flavors that you know as things get cleaner and cleaner. It's the same way with our spirits, by the way. We make spirits as food. I don't think you think of whiskey as food, but it can definitely taste like food if it's made well. So here it is, Noiret. It is 11 years old. It holds the record for how long can it take Steve to make wine. This wine took a full 10 years to make. It's my lightest red. It took 10 years to make. Really frustrating thing. I was going to throw it out at 8 years, but I was going to put it in the still and say, that's it, right? But then came around and checked this out. It's beautiful. And it's great for the summer. Because in the summer we want a light bodied wine, but we want lots of flavor for the barbecue. And there is 10% alcohol red wine with this big spicy peppery balsamic flavor.
And I can taste the balsamic too.
Clean, flavors line up, no mush. So there is how wine used to be, guys. Now, I like, people often say, well, what do you drink? You must only drink your wine since nobody else does this. I like processed wine. I'm not against processed wine. I'm against you not knowing it, right? So here's the way that I would think about that is I'm not against you processing wine for the store, because what the winemakers are doing is they're turning it into an art. Picasso sees the horse is going away, he doesn't move very good. His piece of art can fly, so he draws it, right? What's in the store is art like that. The problem is they're telling you Picasso's horse is a horse. And if you think it is, there's serious problems here, right? So that's the thing, is that what's in the store is art, it's not nature. What you're tasting today is nature. And what I did in making these wines is exactly what the wine industry said was the thing to do. And look at how different they are. And it's because they're making it into art, they're making it sweet and dry and whatever. And there's nothing wrong with art, don't burn the art, right? But understand that it's not a natural thing. So that's sort of the philosophy. My mom's an artist, my dad's a physicist, so I'm not against mom. I'm against you thinking mom and dad are the same people. Any questions? Does it all make sense? I know it's a long tasting. I do appreciate the time. And thank you very much. The wines are in the order tasted on the line.
Okay, well that'll do it from Stoutridge. Beautiful winery, beautiful property, very interesting explanation of the way they do things. Apparently, according to him, they're the only people in America that are doing this. I have no confirmation of that, but there's also no reason not to believe him. The wines themselves were different than what I've ever tasted. They are more natural. You can tell that they don't have the processing, because you can sort of taste the fermentation in them. I don't know if that's the right word that I want to use, but you can tell that they're not as smooth. They're drier. They're not as sweet. They were excellent. We got the Ridge White and the Seyval, both the first two whites that we tried. They are different than anything I've ever tasted before. I would highly recommend coming here, trying out their wines, listening to the presentation. It is definitely an experience that you don't get anywhere else. So that'll do it from here, and remember, corks are for quitters.